In German history, there have been some very crazy plans to conquer other countries. Most of these date back to Hitler's time, such as the plan to invade the British Isles, which we have already looked at in a separate video. Today's plan is even more megalomaniacal than all the previous ones. It deals with the conquest of the United States of America. But the interesting thing is that it doesn't date back to the Nazi era. It was developed at the time of the German Empire between the years 1897 and 1903. The aim was not only to weaken the growing influence of the USA, but above all to strengthen the German position in the Pacific, the Caribbean and South America in order to establish a huge German colonial empire in the long term. But what did the plan look like in detail? What were the chances of success? And why was it never implemented? We look at all these questions in today's video. As we know, the German Empire came into being quite late compared to the other European powers. In the year 1871, the battle for the world's colonies was already in full swing. While Bismarck initially pursued a balanced course vis-a-vis the other powers, Kaiser Wilhelm II was increasingly annoyed by Germany's lagging behind. He also dreamed of a huge colonial empire and the so-called place in the sun. And so, from the year 1888 onwards, German foreign policy increasingly shifted from a balanced stance to an aggressive one. This repeatedly led to clashes with the other colonial powers, and the Kaiser had various war plans developed against other nations. The Kaiser saw the United States in particular as a major competitor as a world power. The latter continued to expand in America and increasingly developed into a hegemonic power on the entire American double continent. And so, from 1897 onwards, the emperor had a total of 3 conquest plans developed against the USA. One of the most important contributors to these plans was Alfred von Tirpitz, who also developed the so-called Tirpitz Plan. According to this plan, Germany was to achieve world power status by building up a huge fleet. And this plan was actually implemented, which is why Germany had the second largest navy in the world until the beginning of the First World War. And Tirpitz was also involved in the USA's invasion plans. This plan envisaged a huge German fleet decisively defeating the American Atlantic Fleet in a surprise attack in order to reach important distribution points on the US coast. The largest ports were to be bombarded in order to finally force the USA into a negotiated peace. The aim of the peace treaty was to wrest bases in the Caribbean and a base in the Pacific from the Americans. However, while this plan was still being drawn up, the situation changed completely. The Americans defeated the Spanish in the Spanish-American War. This victory gave the USA control of Puerto Rico, the Philippines and Guam, and the Caribbean fell under its sphere of influence. Naturally, the American position deteriorated significantly, and the German emperor also realized that the plans had to be revised. The new plan initially envisaged the violent conquest of a base on Cuba, from where the rest of the operation was to be carried out. It was very convenient that the Supreme Admiral announced to the Kaiser in the year 1900 that the German Navy was now stronger than that of the Americans. So this time, too, the American Atlantic Fleet was to be destroyed from Cuba, followed by a landing at Cape Cod in Massachusetts. A huge force was to land there and lay siege to the cities of Boston and New York. However, many generals strongly doubted this plan, as there were not even enough ships for such a landing, and there were also many gaps in its implementation in other areas. This led to a further revision, and the third plan was completed in the year 1903. According to this plan, the German fleet was to assemble off the archipelago of the Azores in the middle of the Atlantic in order to launch an attack on Puerto Rico from there. From there, the Panama Canal was to be conquered and a direct attack launched on the most important city in the USA, New York. The city was to be bled dry until the Americans decided to negotiate peace. Overall, however, this plan was pretty hopeless. Above all, the geopolitical situation had changed dramatically in just a few years. After the victory over the Spanish, a real war spirit had broken out in the USA, and the American army was becoming ever stronger. As a result, the USA emerged more and more from its previous isolation and emerged as an important player in world politics. The Monroe Doctrine, which stated that the Americans would no longer tolerate any interference from European powers on the American double continent, also came into effect at this time. And in the Venezuela crisis in the year 1902, they also made it clear that they would use armed force against the Europeans if necessary. The situation on the European continent also became increasingly difficult for Germany. The British and France formed an alliance in the year 1904 and Russia also increasingly sided with them. Germany was now threatened from two sides and a massive war was brewing. From the year 1906, the US plans were completely abandoned and the focus shifted to improving Germany's position in Europe and the looming First World War.